a very intelligent man, Dr. Ivelaw Griffith, with a retired political scientist, former vice chancellor, an international respected scholar. Dr. Griffith is no stranger to politics and policies of the Caribbean, but today he brings something very interesting, something personal, something refreshing and unexpected. His debut single, Sylvie, Love and Lost, sorry, a new novel from Dr. Ivelaw. Good morning, Dr. Ivelaw, and how are you this morning?
Good morning, Milano, and thank you for having me, and thank you, Shan, for facilitating this opportunity. Delighted to be here.
Yes. So, Tropicalf offers connecting program just welcome Dr. Ivelaw. And we're going to dive straight into this lovely novel. Dr. Ivelaw, how was it for you shifting from policies into writing a novel?
Shan, in Milano, in an early incarnation, I was a journalist
Oh.
long before you were born. And even though for the last 4 decades I'd been an academic writing books and articles in the scholarly side, I was able to remember some of my journalistic training. I did both print and radio as a journalist back in my native Guyana. And so I was able to recall and cull some of those journalistic skills. And when you're writing for print, you have a certain number of words that your editor wants you to work with. If you're writing for radio, you have a number of minutes to work with. You've got to figure out what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end. And so I had the good fortune of remembering and culling some of those journalistic skills. But I also had a challenge. And this is what the challenge represented. In the scholarly writing, it's important to have the evidence, the footnotes, cite the sources. And I was torn between, boy, do I need to, and my editor and my developmental editor kept saying, Dr. G, we don't need the footnotes. Dr. G, you don't need the references. And so I had to be, my gosh, between a rock and a hard place, because I wanted to show the evidence, but knowing that in the novel world, in the fiction world, that is not necessary. In some respects, it's not even desired. So thankfully, I was able to call on some of those journalistic trainings, and I think I did a fairly credible job in this debut novel.
So, Dr. Griffith, you have written books on trafficking and the Caribbean society. What made you decide? You know what? I'm gonna throw a little bit of love because for me it's a drama, but it's also a love novel as well. It has a
Mhm.
bit of romance. It's detailed. For those of you who have not read Sylvie Lost and Love, it's a good read. It has a bit of everything. We do not want to give too much away because we really want you to read the book, but it's
Yes,
good. So, what made you decide I'm gonna throw a bit of love into this
yeah,
novel?
yeah. I'll tell you what, this novel has a connection to my academic work. I had a project way back in the 1990s, 1993, 94. I had a grant from the MacArthur Foundation to do a study of drug operations in the Caribbean. And that grant had funding for me to travel to various parts of the region. One of the places to which in which I did field work was Grenada. And on my preparation to visit Grenada, a good friend of mine, then living in New York, where I was living at the time, said, I heard you going to Grenada. Take this little package for a friend of mine. And so I took this package, as I did several other packages for other friends, to Grenada. And I gave this package to the person to whom my friend intended this package to go, happened to be a wonderful woman. We began to drink shandy, drink beer, talk over cutters, as we call them back in the Caribbean. And this young woman felt so comfortable after a while, she began to tell me her life story. She had a fascinating life story. And her life story had some elements which were startling, troubling. I could not believe that I would meet someone in Grenada. You know, Grenada is called the Spice Isle.
Yes.
This woman had been deported from Canada for drugs. And she's telling me her life story. She even brought a photo album, showing me pictures of when she was back in Canada and so on. And she felt so comfortable, Milano, that after a while she said she made me a discount offer to sell me some cocaine. And I'm saying to myself, what the devil in Grenada? A woman selling me cocaine. So I said, no, I don't do that stuff. Now listen to this, Milano. She did not know that I was in Grenada studying drug operations. She did not know that my research had to do with drugs. So when I said to her, I don't do that stuff, she said to me, Milano, Doc, you can use it for sex. I said, what? So I said, well, tell me how. And Milano, this woman began to explain to me how I can use the cocaine for sex. It was such a revealing, shocking start. I said, geez, I've got to write about this thing one of these days. Actually, in the book I was writing that I was doing the research for, a book called Drugs and Security in the Caribbean, I have 2 or 3 pages explaining this experience in Grenada in the field research. And I remember one of the reviewers of the manuscript for the publisher, the book was published by Penn State University Press. One of the reviewers said, Professor Griffith needs to put a footnote saying he's not advocating the use of cocaine for sex. Because, so it was that experience way back in 1994 that led me to be convinced that I've got to tell this story in another non-academic way one day. And so I decided when I retire, which I did in 2019, I said, I'm going to put pen to paper and put this thing down as a novel. So that's the backstory. That's how the connection between my academic work way back in the 1990s and this Sylvie's Love and Loss 2024.
But I must say that the story of Sylvie, Love and Loss is very relatable. Because being from the Caribbean myself and from the lovely island of Dominica, we all have this family member, this friend who said, can you bring down this package for me? So that was very relatable for me. So I was like, that could happen to any one of us because that's very common
Right.
in the Caribbean that you bring down a package, it's a shoe, or you always, whenever you're leaving the international, that you bring down something for someone from back home. So
Yes.
that's very common.
Yes.
So was it harder for you to explain that sex lesson to people than to say your because you have wrote political science books before. So be honest, was it harder to explaining us this chapter, the sex lesson? Was it harder for you to explain this chapter than a political science one?
Well, actually, it was not as hard. I feel it was disappointing in some respects. And here again, it was that struggle between the political scientist, academic, the intended novelist. I wanted to make the point that even though this experience I had with this woman in Grenada in the 1990s was new to me, using cocaine for sex was not new. And I had a couple of examples of actual cases in other parts of the world. And my developmental editor said, Dr. G, this is taking the story too far afield. One of the remarkable cases, there was a startling case I had in that same sex lesson chapter, was a case in Germany. This was a medical doctor who used to use cocaine to have sex with women. Some of the women were his patients. It was all consensual. And one of the women died because he'd used too much cocaine. She went into convulsions during sex, and she eventually died. And that her death led to an investigation that showed that he had been doing this thing for a while, and he was charged, convicted. So it was not so much difficult, but I wanted to make the point that, yes, this may be something new in parts of the Caribbean, but it is not new around the world. But I tell you what, Milano, part of what was intriguing and shocking to me was to have this experience in Grenada. You know,
Yeah.
if there was a part of the Caribbean that I would have maybe not been as startled about with this experience, would have been maybe Jamaica or Puerto Rico or Bahamas, where the drugs experience had been more significant at that time than in Eastern Caribbean. It's only in the last 12, 15 years that the Eastern Caribbean has been so rife with the drugs issue. True, St. Vincent had a long history of producing marijuana, but not cocaine and heroin and methamphetamines and Molly, which have been prevalent in parts of the Eastern Caribbean in the last decade and a half.
Because what many people don't know, the Caribbean is untouched. We have that idea that the Caribbean is untouched. We don't expect cocaine to be in our lovely
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean
Mm-hmm.
islands.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the Caribbean is a gem, but
Yeah. Yep.
like all gems,
It's a
it's
gem,
not.
but it's a
Yeah,
gem that has been despoiled. It's a
true.
gem that has been despoiled by drugs and the things related to drugs, the crime, the violence.
Correct.
And as a matter of fact, Sylvie's Love and Loss is not the original title.
What was it?
The original title I had in mind was Victims, because having studied the drugs issue over the decades, I saw Sylvie, I saw Grenada, I saw the Caribbean, I saw the parts of the world as victims of this drugs phenomenon. But at one point, my developmental editor, she did a critique of the first draft, and she said, Dr. G, this title is too academic. You've got to find a different title. I had victims and a very long subtitle. She said, why don't you find a title for the novel that is different? So I said, let me go back to one of the central characters and wrap a new title around that character. I went to Sylvie, one of the main characters in the novel. And I decided to use Love and Love because, as you quite rightly said earlier on, Milano, it's a combination of a wonderful set of experiences.
Yeah.
Their love experiences, their sadness experiences with loss, their highs, their lows. I try to bring in some of the realities of not just the wonderful, pristine Caribbean, but the sad elements of the
Yeah.
Caribbean, sad partly because of the drugs and the poverty and the violence, love and loss. Sylvie's Love and Loss is what I decided ultimately to call the novel.
And it's a good title because for me,
Thank you.
I'm an avid reader, but I don't like reading the subtitles to know what the book's about. I want to be
Mhm.
surprised. So I was like, Sylvie Lost and Love. When I received my copy, I was like, Sylvie Lost, what will this book be about? I think maybe death, maybe grief, maybe how to deal with grief. So when I dive in, I was like, whoa, I am in for a rude awakening and a big surprise. So I was
Good,
like, yes. So I
good.
really, so a question that I had, because when I was reading, doing my bachelor's, whenever I read, I make like footnotes at the end of my reading.
Hmm.
I really
Good.
want you to tell us what would you want the readers to view Sylvie as? Is it a victim, a survivor, or is it something else? What would you really want the viewers or the readers to view Sylvie as?
Powerful question, Milano. Like most characters, Sylvie has a complexity to her. And part of the complexity is where she is a victim. Part of the complexity is where she is a survivor. Part of the complexity is where she is, because of the survival, she's able to give credit to the people who help her to survive. One of the things I invoke in the novel is a lot of music. And there's a chapter, I think chapter 3, called Gratitudes and Blessings, Blessings and Gratitude. But I'm hoping that when people will have read the novel, they will see that gratitude and blessings are reflected in not only Sylvie's experience. And the gratitude and blessings are partly because there are other complex characters who helped her to get above the sadness, get above the loss. One of those powerful characters is Mama Roberts,
Yep.
her maternal grandmother. Mama Roberts, a strong woman, didn't go far in school, a market vendor, but knew the power of love, knew the power of faith, knew the power of education. And so, even though she had to raise Sylvie and her siblings, abandoned by both mother and father, she ensured that all of them went to school and that Sylvie was able to get a powerful education. So, Sylvie herself is a complex character that fell in love with a guy who decided to use her, make her a drug mule. A complex character who fell in love with a wonderful Canadian scientist who had an addiction to gambling, who didn't do well on the home front. But Sylvie is also a victim of the racism. Here it is Sylvie, dynamic, beautiful, talented, young black woman, marries and is taken to Canada by this Jewish guy, most of whose parents don't like the fact that she's Christian, don't like the fact that she is black. So part of her complexity is helping to navigate and deal with that reality. Here it is, you leave the wonderful sunny Caribbean, you go to Canada in a cold part of the year, and then you meet most of my new husband's family who don't like me because you're black, because you're not Jewish. So Sylvie is a complex character. And I'm hoping that I did a wonderful, or at least a useful job in revealing the complexities, not only of that character, complexity of geography, weaving the connectivity of the Caribbean and North America. There's a relationship between Jamaica, Grenada, and St. Lucia, and Guyana. Sylvie's father is from Guyana. There's a complexity to one of the things I'm hoping that you will have seen in the novel Milano. I grew up with a maternal grandmother from St. Lucia. And I grew up in a household where all these herbs and natural medicines were part of our life. And I wanted to reflect in the novel some things that we take for granted in modern society. Even in parts of the Caribbean, we take for granted. And I'll tell you one story where about a decade ago, I saw the potency in modern day of the natural medicine. My wife, who was from St. Lucia, we were back in St. Lucia. She is from Soufrière, where my maternal grandmother is also from. And we were taking a van going from Castries, the capital, up the mountains to Soufrière. You know how Caribbean vans is supposed to have 12 people, but there's 50 people in it. Supposed to have 10, it's 30 people in it.
Yes.
So there we were in this crowded, we're in this crowded van going up the mountains, up the winding roads up to Soufrière. And in the van with us was a pregnant woman. And winding up the mountain, she began to get so sick. And she had to, the driver, you need to let me out. The guy pulled over Milano. He brought her out to the van, lead her up in the van. He went to the bushes. He grabbed one clump of bushes, he smelled it, he threw it away. When he got to like the 7th or 8th bush, he grabbed some, crushed it up in his hand, and he put it against this pregnant woman's nostril a couple of times. We were sitting in this van watching this woman revive from this bush in the guy's hand. And then he helped her to get back in the van, and we continued up the mountains. So I wanted to reflect some of the flora and fauna and natural herbs in the novel, reflect the wonderful foods. I had a book launch at a university here in Long Island, Adelphi University. And it was fascinating. One of the people in the audience, she said, "Oh, I read the novel. I was so excited to see that the novel is from my husband's country." Her husband is from Grenada. and she wanted the whole audience to know, I have eaten oil down. I described oil down in the
Yes, you
novel.
did.
I
And
said,
you
I've
did
eaten,
very
I know how to cook.
passionately.
I know how to cook oil down. So I wanted to
You did.
reflect the value, the richness, the complexity of the natural medicine, of the herbs, of the flora and the fauna, of the geography. So Sylvie herself is a complex character. She's a victim, but she's also a strong woman. She's
Mhm.
a survivor.
Yeah. That's one of the most powerful themes I really enjoy. That the resilience of a Caribbean woman.
Mm-hmm.
Disclaimer: we're not saying that all other women are not resilient, but a
Uh-huh.
Caribbean woman is very resilient
Yep.
because given
Yep.
all what Sylvie has been through, she
Mm-hmm.
never gave up, and that's one of the
Absolutely.
most powerful themes. I really was empowered by Sylvia as a man because she did not give up. Because sometimes in life we go through our own ups and downs and
Mm-hmm.
we're quick to throw in the towel. But look at
Yep.
Sylvie, she never gave
Yep.
in the throw
Yep.
in the towel. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
and she keep persevering forward. Even Mama Roberts as well.
Oh,
When
yes.
life gave you orange lemons, they really made lemonade in this
Absolutely. And
book.
sweet,
Each
sweet, sweet
character
lemonade
really,
too.
yeah,
Sweet, sweet, sweet lemonade. Yeah, powerful
yes.
characters. You know, one person asked me during the course of the editing, I remember one of the comments I got from an editor who said, Dr. G, some of these women in your novel are so cantankerous, fighting and fussing. Can you tone it down? I said, no,
No,
that's the reality of life. Whether the Caribbean or other societies, women sometimes fight over men that they shouldn't be fighting over.
mm,
And Sylvie herself, her husband had an affair with her best friend, the affair that started in our Sylvie's own home. And that's the reality of life in so
yeah.
many societies in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the thing that most books don't really want to touch about the reality. Yes, it's that's one of the things I enjoyed about the book. Yes, it's fiction, some parts are fiction, but it's really reality if you look at some
Hmm.
of the things that happen in the book, some of the character development, that
Oh,
there
yeah.
is things that happen in our everyday lives. To our
Absolutely.
family members, to our cousins, to our friends, we read about it on
Hmm.
Newsweek. That's things that are really happening every day. So that's one of the
Absolutely.
most powerful things I really enjoyed about the
I'm
book.
glad you did. Glad
Yes,
you did.
yes.
Glad you did.
So, have you ever thought of taking this book or this series because you dropped a little just before we log on? You dropped a little hint
Hmm.
of the Sylvie series. I'm just throwing it out there. That
Yeah.
would you ever consider taking this novel into a movie or a series?
Well, you know, that suggestion has been made by very many people.
Yeah.
And I know that the woman who was my publicist, that seed has been planting with her.
Yes.
I don't want to say too much about it, but the seed has been planted. And especially when I get to the sequel, and I'll tell you a little bit about the sequel if you're interested,
We are.
which I'll be right.
We are.
I'll start to write later on. I think once we get to the sequel, the opportunities might be even greater to make film out of
Yes.
Sylvie's Love and Loss and the sequel.
I would enjoy the Netflix series. I honestly would.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about turning it into a film, what actor would you like to play Sylvie? Because Sylvie is a complex character. Which actress, actor would you like to play Sylvie?
I'll have to think about that. I'll have to think about that. I don't want to give any names without a little more reflection, but there are lots of opportunities and lots of opportunities for cameo appearances by
Yes.
people. You know, some of the characters I have built off of real personalities.
Yes.
Some are alive, some are dead. Mama Roberts. I patterned Mama Roberts after my grandmother.
Wow.
Uh, Born in St. Lucia, moved to Guyana way back in the 1930s. I grew up with a whole lot of cousins. Some of them are not biological, some are sociological because she was adopting all these kids.
Yes. That's the
Um,
Caribbean for you.
so it's so some of the characters are based on individuals who are actually alive. Some of them are dead, but there are many opportunities for have actresses and actors who are skilled,
Yeah.
but also cameo opportunities.
Yeah. So while writing, I know you had to go through the process of writing. Did anything stood out to you that said, "I can't believe I just made Sylvie the did that"?
Ah, there are some scenes where Sylvie's mother appeared in a dream. And one of the dreams, at first, when I wrote that part of the novel, I said, boy, do I want to make it so graphic, so traumatic. And then I said, let's leave it because sometimes you have dreams that are scary.
Yeah, that's true.
Sometimes you have dreams that resonate with the reality. You have dreams that kind of foretell what is going to happen. You don't have to be psychic to have dreams. And there is a dream scene where Sylvie was encountering her father. Sylvie's mother was encountering Sylvie's father. That is a little caused me to reflect and ponder, do I want to leave this the way it is or no? And when I didn't get any pushback, any suggestion for modification from my editor, I said, let it be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a dream scene up the mountain in St. Lucia.
Yes, but you really captured every Caribbean essence in this book. I can't stop talking about how good this book is. Trust
Thank
me,
you.
I it's you capture every from the first chapter to the food because I'm a Caribbean foodie myself.
Hmm.
Dominica, just like Grenada, I believe that we are all one big melting pot.
Oh,
So our
yes.
food, though we use different ingredients, but it's basically the same.
Oh,
I
yes.
was I was just captivated. I believe the first chapter talking about the food. I say, okay, I'm sold on this book. I'm sold. I'm sold on this book.
Yes, yes.
But
My wife and we were someplace recently. It was in Grenada. When we got there into Grenada, the friend who retired and moved back to Grenada, he's one of the characters in the book,
mhm,
took us to this local food joint. I think it's every Friday night they have this kind of local food fair. And I saw Christophine, which I grew up in Guyana from the St. Lucian side. And I said to my wife, you haven't cooked Christophine for a long time. When we get back to New York, you have to cook Christophine. Local foods. Local foods, yes.
local
Yes.
and local is best,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the medicines, local is best. It's better to go
Mm-hmm.
natural with
Mm-hmm.
all this process. Local
Yep.
is best.
Yep.
So the book is dedicated to your wife.
Yep.
Just how did your wife think about it when she first read it? What was her views? What was her comments? Did she wanted to add anything, remove anything? What was her whole idea and emotion based on this masterpiece book?
My wife gets the credit for saving me from myself in a significant way. All the things that I've written over the years, academic stuff, non-academic stuff, I would give it to her, to other friends, to my kids to read, give me feedback. And I was doing the same thing with the novel. And she said to me at one point, she said, honey, this is your first novel. Nobody wants to read a 500-page novel. Why did you cut it? Make it short. I am thankful I took my wife's suggestion, and the book is what it is. So
Yes.
I had so much plot developed at the time, character elaboration at the time. I have enough the basis for the second novel. So I thank my wife, among other things, for that. And she's an RN. So I consulted her on a lot of things related to that part of, I think it was chapter 2, the birth, the whole birthing experience, the pregnancy experience, the birthing. She was quite helpful on that and other elements. There's a part when Sylvie's paramour, Rastaman, tried to commit suicide. She and I talked about that, the hospital experience. So she was very helpful in giving me feedback, critique, helpful advice along the way in those health related aspects. But she's the one who said, nobody wants to read a 500-page first novel. Keep it short.
Yes.
And so I keep it to what it is, and I have the basis for the sequel, the next novel, which I'm going to begin to write later on this year.
Yes. Thank you, wife. Because another interesting thing, the book had so much going on, but yet still it was still short, but not leave anything untouched. That's
Right.
the gist or the good thing. But I don't know, but that's a good thing about the book. It gives so much character development, but yet still it's not too long or makes you feel bored reading. It's like how can I can't even describe it. I'm looking for words and I'm lost for words to describe how it's like water.
Thank
It
you,
was
Milano.
just smooth and flowed. Yes, it was
Yes.
like a river, Caribbean river.
Yes. Yes.
That's how
And that's
well it
that's
is.
one of the things I developed over the years, writing academic and non-academic, to make the connection, to keep the connections. I did a I have a former student of mine who is now a professor at a university in Florida, and he sent me something. I usually send my stuff to people to give me feedback, and he sent me an article he's writing to me. And I said to him, friend, you need to build a connectivity. The flow needs to be there. The transitions, you need to show, it doesn't have to be a long paragraph, maybe a couple of sentences that show the connection between this section and that section. And I made special effort to show the connection between chapter one and chapter two and chapter two and chapter three and so on.
Yes, it was very good. So now, Dr. Griffith, you have mastered academia. You know a new fiction writer. What's
Hmm.
next? I know we're gonna have the continuation of Sylvie, and you have a
Hmm.
new book coming out that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But
Yes.
what next for you? Is it a cooking show, perhaps? To the Caribbean food?
I'm not
Cooking
that
with
good.
conflict. I have
Uh,
a name for it. Cooking with conflict.
that's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. Maybe you and I can team up on that one.
Yes.
Um, what I have in mind as the next project is a podcast. And I don't want to tell the details yet, but I've already spoken with the guy who would be co host in the podcast. And the podcast will look at aspects of what will be the next book coming out, just not the novel, next academic book, which deals with Guyana.
Yep.
So the podcast will be my next project. And I'm hoping that it will be a fascinating project, just as exciting as
Yep.
writing books and articles.
Yes.
Yep.
So since we already let the cat out of the bag, so you have a new book coming
Mm-hmm.
out. Would you like mind telling us about that book, giving us the name of the book? Just share
Yes.
a few details about your new book that will be coming out very soon.
Yep. Well, by the time a month comes around, by early July, the publisher, Ian Randall Publishers of Jamaica, will release this new book. It's called Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood: Probing Promise and Potential Peril. And what I do in this book is to ask the question, what are some of the challenges and opportunities with regard to oil and climate change in Guyana? Guyana is having a new experience with a massive bounty of oil and gas.
Sure.
But Guyana also has the challenge, like many Caribbean and other parts of the world, climate change. And in this book, I ask for us to consider the paradox that Guyana finds itself in. It's not the only country with that paradox. And
That's
here's the paradox: the 11 billion barrels equivalent of oil means that Guyana is contributing now to global warming in a significant way. But at the same time, Guyana has a massive carbon sink because of its wonderful forests. 84% of Guyana is forested. And so that carbon sink is helping to battle the global warming.
yes.
So here it is, the same country that's producing all this bad stuff is helping to deal with the bad stuff. And so the book is looking at what have been the experiences with Guyana with the exploration and the production, what have been the experiences with the engagement of the diaspora, of civil society, what has been some of the litigation in regards to oil and climate change matters. But I also take the opportunity in the book to make the point that you really can't understand the promise of Guyana with the oil and the potential peril of the climate change unless you understand the reality of the Essequibo.
Sure.
So 2 chapters of the book look at the claim by Venezuela over the Essequibo territory. And although many people, even people in Guyana, know of the Essequibo claim by Venezuela, I suspect that many people will be shocked at the details about that claim. The Essequibo claim, United States has 50 states. Guyana is divided into regions. The Essequibo claim involves 6 of Guyana's 10 regions. The Essequibo claim involves 74% of Guyana. You may not know, Milano, but Jamaica can fit into the Essequibo 14 and a half times.
Wow.
The Essequibo territory is bigger than England. So we're not talking about a small bit of territory. But hear this about the Essequibo. To really understand the dynamics of climate change, you have to understand the Essequibo.
That's true.
Because that's where most of the forests are. That's where all the waterfalls are. That's where most of the significant rivers, the Essequibo River itself is the 3rd largest river in the Americas, in South America.
I remember reading that, yes.
Amazon, Orinoco, Essequibo.
Yes.
So you're talking about a significant amount of climatic, topographical, geographic value. Essequibo is where gold is, diamonds, manganese, bauxite, uranium. So if the Essequibo is lost, the promise of Guyana, even with the oil, will be significantly undermined.
And impacted, yes.
So I make the point in 2 substantive chapters that you really have to understand the dynamics of the Essequibo to understand the promise and the peril. The promise of the gold, the black gold, oil, and the peril of climate change. So hopefully your viewers
like the devil advocate. You're playing both sides.
Oh, yes. The reality of the paradox. The reality of the paradox. Yes. Coming out soon.
Coming out soon. You heard it here first at Tropical Offer Connecting. Coming out soon. So if anyone wants to purchase Sylvie's Love and Loss, where can they purchase that book?
My wife was doing some browsing a couple of months ago. She said, "Honey, I didn't know that Sylvie Love and Loss is available through Walmart." I said, "I didn't know that either. I knew it was available and has been bought through the publisher, Wordy. It's available through Amazon. But my wife discovered it's also available through Walmart and Barnes & Nobles.
Yes.
So you can get Sylvie's Love and Loss there. And you can also, when the new book comes out, it'll be on Amazon. It will be all available on Ian Randall Publishers' website and other places. Yeah. Hopefully Walmart will pick it up too.
Also, I'm going to give you a surprise. It's also on Apple's book list.
Oh!
You could have it as a virtual copy.
Wow, didn't know that.
Yes.
Didn't know that.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing that factoid, Milano.
I purchased both the hard copy and I also purchased it on Apple.
Great.
So I have my e-copy with me.
Good. Thank you. Didn't know that.
Yes.
Learn something new every day.
Yes. So just a surprise, it's also on Apple. Yes.
Wonderful.
That's how good it is. It's everywhere. You can't, if you don't want the hard copy, you can have the e-copy. Yes.
That's great.
So, sadly, we have come at the end of our interview. We had a very insightful talk with Dr. Griffith on his book, his novel, Sylvie's Love and Loss. It was a very insightful interview, very interactive. I enjoyed it. We learned something new
Thank
about
you.
each character. We also learned about his new book. So, just before we close, is there anything you want to say? Is there any thank you want to give? Any shout outs?
Well, I want to thank my publisher of Sylvie's Love and Loss, Marva Allen. And it's curious how I met Marva. There's another good friend of mine who's a publisher of New York Carib News, went to his conference in Ocho Rios and met another of his friends, Marva Allen. And I said to Marva, I've been working on this novel. I put it aside, and she said, send it to me. Let me see what it looks like. So when I got back to New York, I sent the manuscript to Marva. I didn't hear from Marva for several months. I said to myself, Marva probably not even thinking to have it. Lo and behold, Milano, I got a contract. got a contract in the mail. Wow. We were delighted to publish them. So I want to thank Marva and Carl Rodney for facilitating that introduction. And thank my Ian Randall, my long-standing friend. The Guyana book, I didn't have any intention of writing a book in Guyana. But I got this email from Ian Randall. Ian Randall has been a friend. He published a book I edited in 2004, Caribbean Security in the Age of Terror. But he also was instrumental in helping me when I was Vice Chancellor, University of Guyana, helping me to establish University of Guyana Press. So when Ian sent me this email saying, Ivelaw, I've been following your writings on Guyana, the oil and the climate change. Why don't you do a little book for us? I couldn't really turn Ian down. So what he had in mind as a small book, this book is 426 pages. So I want to I thank him in the preface, thank him for motivating me to write my first book on Guyana. It's my first book on Guyana, my native land. So thanks to Ian Randall of Ian Randall Publishers for motivating, incentivizing me to write this book on oil and climate change.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Griffith, for joining us for a special edition of Authors Connecting Cultural Reading Program, proudly presented by Inc., Tropicalfete Inc., in celebration of Caribbean American Heritage Month, June 2025, where heritage meets the written world. I just want to thank Ms. Shan Oliver Julian, Administrator in Chief, and thank you for joining us, and for all our listeners and viewers, thank you for joining us for yet another Office Connected. It was nice connecting with Dr. Griffith. I can't wait for all the new books coming out, especially Sylvie Part 2. I will have my ears and eyes open for that announcement so I can continue diving into the world of Sylvie. Again, thank you, and this is Milano Remie signing off.
Thank you, Milano. Thank you, Shan. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.